What would you do if the person who loved you most left you something everyone else called an insult, and it turned out to be the greatest gift you ever received? The morning Loretta Sims, 61, buried her older sister, it rained in Asheville the way it only rains in October. Slow and deliberate, like the sky itself was in no hurry to be done grieving. Loretta stood at the graveside in a black coat she'd worn to 3 funerals now, the lining fraying at the left cuff, and she kept her eyes on the casket because she couldn't look at her brother-in-law Wade without feeling something she didn't have a name for yet. Not hate. Something quieter and more corrosive than that. Bet had been 58 years old. Too young by any measure. The cancer had moved fast, the way bad things tend to when you can't afford to slow them down. And Loretta had driven the 4 hours from Knoxville to Asheville every other weekend for the last 8 months, sleeping on Betty's couch when Wade made it clear the guest room was being used for storage. She'd held her sister's hand through the chemo. She'd sat in plastic hospital chairs until her back ached for days afterward. She'd been there at the end, at 2 in the morning on a Tuesday, when Betty's breathing changed and then stopped. Wade had not been there. Wade had been at a work dinner in Charlotte. That was what he said anyway. Loretta was a bookkeeper for a small heating and cooling company in Knoxville. She made decent money, not great money. Her own apartment was fine. 2 bedrooms, one of which she used as an office, on the 2nd floor of a building that smelled faintly of the Thai restaurant below it. She'd been divorced for 11 years. Her son, Kevin, lived in Portland and called her on Sundays. That was her life. It was a good life. It was not a life that had much cushion in it, and the 8 months of driving back and forth to Asheville had eaten through the cushion she did have. She'd had to dip into savings twice. She didn't regret it for a second. She'd do it again tomorrow. What she hadn't expected was the will reading. Bet and Wade didn't have children. Their estate, the house, the investment accounts, the life insurance, was substantial. Loretta had known Bet had money, not because Bet flaunted it, but because Wade did, in the small pointed ways that men like Wade tend to. The car he drove, the way he talked about their kitchen renovation like it was a civic contribution. The attorney's office was on the 4th floor of a building downtown. Wood paneling, a window that looked out over the mountains going soft in the rain. The attorney's name was Gerald Hartwell, a thin man in his 60s with reading glasses he kept removing and replacing as though they were optional. Wade sat across from Loretta in a leather chair, his legs crossed, wearing a suit that was almost certainly more expensive than anything Loretta owned. His girlfriend, because that is what she was, Loretta had found out 3 weeks after Betty's diagnosis, was not present. Apparently even Wade had limits. Gerald Hartwell opened the folder and began to read. The house went to Wade. The investment accounts went to Wade. The life insurance went to Wade. Loretta had not expected anything different. She hadn't come for money. She'd come because Bet had specifically asked her to be present, had made Loretta promise on one of those couch-sleeping weekends, her voice still carrying that particular Bet quality of making requests sound like they were doing you a favor. "Promise me you'll go, Letty. Promise me you'll sit in that room." Loretta had promised. Then Gerald Hartwell reached the final item and paused in the way that attorneys pause when they know something is about to land awkwardly. "To my sister, Loretta Ann Sims," he read, "I leave the contents of the storage unit at Blue Ridge Self-Storage, Unit 44, including all items therein, particularly the wooden crate that belonged to our grandmother, Opal Crenshaw, which Loretta always admired." The room was very quiet. Wade uncrossed his legs and recrossed them. "The storage unit," he said, in a tone that was technically neutral and actually wasn't. Loretta said nothing. "All the good furniture from her mother's house went into that unit when we cleaned it out," Gerald Hartwell said carefully. "I believe there's also some artwork. Bet was quite specific that the crate should go to you, Miss Sims." Wade made a sound that was not quite a laugh. "Well," he said, "she always did have a soft spot for old junk." He left before Loretta did. She sat in the leather chair for another minute, listening to the rain against the window, and then she thanked Gerald Hartwell and took the key he slid across the desk toward her. She drove to Blue Ridge Self-Storage alone. Unit 44 was in the back of the facility, one of the larger units, and when Loretta rolled up the metal door, the smell that came out was the smell of her childhood. Cedar and old paper, and something faintly floral, like sashes her grandmother used to tuck into drawers. She stood in the entrance for a moment and just breathed it. There was furniture, a settee, 2 wingback chairs, a secretary desk she remembered from her Grandmother Opal's living room. There were boxes of dishes, carefully wrapped. There were lamps. There were framed paintings stacked against the far wall, turned face in. And there, in the center of the unit on a wooden pallet, was the crate. It was not what most people would call impressive. It was roughly 2 feet square, made of wood that had gone dark with age, reinforced at the corners with strips of tarnished metal. The latch was a simple hook and eye that had rusted to a deep reddish brown. There was no ornamentation, nothing to indicate what it had once held. It looked like something you might find at the back of a barn. Loretta knew this crate. She had known it her whole life. It had sat in her Grandmother Opal's bedroom, beneath the window that overlooked the side yard where the magnolia tree grew. Opal Crenshaw had been the daughter of a woman who'd worked her whole life and kept everything that mattered in a wooden box because she didn't trust banks, and she didn't trust people who wore their money on the outside. Loretta had asked about the crate once when she was maybe 9 years old, and Opal had just smiled and said, "That box has held more history than most museums, baby girl." Loretta crouched down and lifted the latch. It resisted, rust and time, and then gave with a sound like a sigh. Inside, fabric. Old fabric, ivory-colored, folded in careful layers. And beneath the fabric, wrapped in more of it, several smaller items that Loretta lifted out one by one and set on the concrete floor beside her, not yet knowing what she was looking at, just understanding that whatever these were, Bette had wanted her to have them. She drove back to Knoxville that evening with the crate in her trunk, wrapped in a moving blanket she'd found in the storage unit. She didn't open it again that night. She was too tired, and grief has a way of making you careful with things that might matter. It was Wade who called the next morning. She was on her second cup of coffee, sitting at the kitchen table with the crate on the chair across from her, when her phone rang. She almost didn't pick up. Then she did. "I've been thinking," Wade said, and his voice had a particular quality she recognized. The quality of a man who's already decided what he wants, and is performing the act of thinking about it for your benefit. Bet had a lot of personal things in that unit, things that have sentimental value to our family. "I'd like to come by and go through some of it." The will was pretty clear, Wade. "I'm not talking about the will, Loretta. I'm talking about family." She looked at the crate. "I'll keep that in mind," she said, and ended the call. He called again 2 days later. This time the performance was gone, and the underneath of it was showing. "That storage unit has pieces from our home," he said. "Furniture Bet and I picked out together. I'd like them back. Bette left you the house, Wade. She left the storage unit to me. Some of that stuff is worth real money. You know that, right? You shouldn't just be sitting on it." "I'm not sitting on it," Loretta said. "I'm figuring out what to do with it." "Sell it to me. I'll give you fair market value for the furniture. You keep the old crate, since apparently that's what she wanted you to have." A pause. "Lord knows what you're going to do with a rotted-out wooden box." She hung up. She thought about calling Kevin, but Kevin was 3 time zones away and had a new baby, and she didn't want to put this on him. She thought about calling her friend Darlene, but Darlene would tell her to sell everything and take a vacation, which was probably good advice and wasn't what she needed right now. What she needed was to figure out what was actually in this crate. She spread a clean sheet on the kitchen table, her best sheet, the Egyptian cotton one she'd bought herself for her 50th birthday, and began to take the contents out carefully, one at a time. The fabric was silk. Old silk, ivory and cream, and when she unfolded it, she realized it was a shawl. Enormous, maybe 5 feet across, with hand-embroidered edges. She didn't know what she was looking at. She just knew it was old and that someone had taken exquisite care of it. Beneath the shawl, the kind that might hold a pocket watch. Inside the case was not a watch. It was a brooch. Oval, maybe 2 inches long, set in gold that had gone warm with age. The center stone was deep green, deep in the way that made Loretta think of the word saturated, though she couldn't have told you why. Around it, smaller stones, also green, graduating in size. She turned it in the morning light, and it did something stones only do when they're real. Beneath the brooch, another case, rectangular. Inside that a string ansels, not costume pearls. Loretta had seen costume pearls her whole life, and they had a certain flatness to them. These had a quality she could only describe as alive. She let them pool in her palm, and they were warm and heavy, in a way plastic never is. Beneath the pearls, a folded letter written in the small, precise hand of a woman who had learned penmanship in a schoolhouse rather than a classroom. To my granddaughter Bet, and to Betted sister Loretta, who has always known that what matters isn't how a thing looks on the outside. Loretta had to stop reading for a moment. These pieces came to me from my own mother, who kept them hidden for reasons you don't need to know, and that no longer matter. What matters is that they are real, and they are valuable, and they belong to the women in this family who understand what it means to keep going when keeping going is the hardest thing there is. The brooch is emerald and diamond. The pearls are natural, not cultured. The shawl is cashmere, over 100 years old. Have them evaluated by someone reputable, and trust what they tell you. I leave them to Betty in the care that she will know to pass them to Loretta, because Loretta is the one who will need them most and use them best. With all my love, your grandmother Opal Loretta sat at her kitchen table for a long time after that. The coffee went cold. Outside the window, the Thai restaurant was starting its lunch prep, and she could hear the faint percussion of it through the floor. She thought about Opal, who had lived her entire adult life in a modest house in Asheville and driven a 12-year-old Buick and never once complained about money in Loretta's hearing. She thought about her mother, who'd said once that Opal's mother had come through some hard times and never elaborated. She thought about Bet, who had held this knowledge for how long? Since Opal died, 8 years ago. Bet had held this, and she'd held it, and she'd put it in a storage unit under furniture, and she'd waited. She always did have a soft spot for old junk. Wade's voice in her head, satisfied with itself. Loretta picked up the brooch and looked at it in the light again. Then she called a jeweler. His name was Frederick Ansell, and he came recommended by Gerald Hartwell, who Loretta called because he was the only person in Asheville she trusted. Frederick Ansell had a shop in a converted Victorian on Lexington Avenue, the kind of shop where the bell above the door sounds handmade, and the display cases have velvet that's been there since the Clinton administration. He was somewhere in his mid-70s, white-haired, with the careful, unhurried movements of a man who has spent his life handling objects that break. He looked at the brooch first. He put his loop in. He took it out. He put it back in. He turned the brooch slowly under a lamp that threw a focused beam, and Loretta watched his face the way you watch someone's face when they're reading news you can't yet see. Frederick Ansell set the loop down. His jaw was working slightly, the way jaws do when someone is making a decision about what to say. "Where did you get this?" he asked. His voice was very controlled. "My grandmother left it to me. Indirectly, and you didn't know what it was? I had no idea." He looked at the brooch again. Then he looked at Loretta. Then he did something she had not expected. His eyes filled. He wasn't crying, not quite. But the eyes of a 70-something man who has spent 50 years looking at jewelry do not fill up without a reason. "This is a Victorian emerald and diamond cluster brooch," he said. "The emeralds are Colombian. The cut, the setting, the provenance, I'd need to do a full appraisal to give you a number. But I can tell you right now that this piece is," he paused, "significant. I have not seen a piece like this in private hands in a very long time." Loretta asked him to look at the pearls. He did. The process was slower. He took measurements. He used a device she didn't recognize. He held each pearl near his ear and rolled it slowly between his fingertips. Natural, not cultured. You can always tell by the weight and the surface texture, and there's a test. He stopped himself. Natural pearl necklaces of this length and quality are extraordinarily rare. The market for them has been. He shook his head slightly, like he was setting a thought aside. These were likely assembled in the late 19th century. The clasp is consistent with that period. He took off his glasses and set them on the counter. "Miss Sims," he said, "I want to be careful about numbers until I've done a full written appraisal, because these are not items you want to undervalue or move quickly. But I need you to understand the scope of what you're sitting with. The brooch alone at current auction. We would be talking, conservatively, some between $300,000 and $400,000, possibly more depending on provenance documentation. The pearls," he paused again, "I would not want to put a preliminary number on the pearls without more research. But natural pearl necklaces of this quality have sold in recent years for figures that would have seemed impossible 20 years ago." The shop was very quiet. Through the front window, Loretta could see a couple walking past on the sidewalk, holding hands, carrying coffee cups, paying no attention to anything. "The shawl," Loretta said. Her voice came out steady. She was not sure how. Cashmere shawls from the early to mid-19th century have their own collector market, Frederick said. "It's smaller than the jewelry market, but it's serious. If this is what it appears to be, and it appears to be a fine example, you're looking at another 20 to 40,000, possibly more." Loretta put both hands flat on the glass countertop. She needed something solid. "My grandmother drove a 12-year-old Buick," she said. Frederick Ansell's eyes were still bright. "I've seen that before," he said gently. "People who came through genuine hardship. They kept what mattered and they didn't talk about it, sometimes for decades." He looked at the brooch one more time. "Your grandmother understood something that most people don't. The best things don't advertise themselves. She drove home with the crate in the trunk and the windows down despite the October cold, because she needed air. She needed to think about Opal, about a woman who'd worked her whole life and kept emeralds in a box under her bedroom window and never said a word, about what it means to trust someone enough to leave them everything and make them wait until they need it. Wade called that evening. She let it go to voicemail. His message was longer this time. He'd heard. She didn't know how. Small town. People talk. Maybe Gerald Hartwell's assistant said something. Maybe it was just the universe being efficient about irony. He'd heard she'd been to a jeweler with some of Betty's things. He wanted to talk. He was sure there had been some misunderstanding about what Betty had intended. He used the word equitable twice. He said that Betty would have wanted everyone to be taken care of. Loretta listened to the voicemail twice. The second time she noticed something she hadn't caught the first time. A slight shift in his voice partway through. A hairline fracture in the confidence. He didn't know what she had. He was guessing. He was scared of what the guess meant. She deleted the voicemail and called her son Kevin in Portland. "Mum," he said when she'd finished explaining. "Mum, I know. What are you going to do? I'm going to get a full appraisal." Frederick Ansell said 2 weeks. "Then I'm going to talk to an estate attorney. Not Gerald Hartwell. No, someone who doesn't know Wade." Kevin was quiet for a moment. She could hear her granddaughter making the small vowel sounds of a baby who isn't sure yet whether she's happy or not. "Great-great-grandma Opal," Kevin said finally. "I wish I'd known her better." "She knew you," Loretta said. "She used to say you had good eyes." She didn't tell Kevin the numbers yet. She wanted to have something solid on paper first. She was, after all, a bookkeeper. She believed in documentation. The full appraisal took 3 weeks, not 2. Frederick Ansell brought in a colleague for the pearls, a woman named Dr. Sylvia Park from a natural history museum in Charlotte, who studied historic jewelry collections, and who sat across from Loretta at a table covered in soft cloth and spoke about the pearls with the focused reverence of someone who'd spent a career looking for exactly this kind of thing. The cashmere shawl was photographed and sent to a textile specialist in New York. When the appraisal documents arrived, Loretta sat down at the kitchen table with them, the same table where she'd unpacked the crate 3 weeks earlier, and read through them in the order they were presented. The brooch, Colombian emerald and diamond cluster, late Victorian, likely 1880s, weight and quality consistent with top-tier estate production of the period. Appraised value, $385,000 to $410,000. The pearls, natural saltwater pearls, assembled necklace, circa 1890 to 1900, 53 pearls of matched quality, clasp original and consistent with period. The numbers on the page were followed by a parenthetical from Dr. Sylvia Park that read simply, "These are exceptional. The collector market for natural pearl necklaces of this caliber and completeness is extremely active. I would recommend consultation with a major auction house before any sale decision. Appraised value, $600,000 to $850,000. The cashmere shawl, authenticated early 19th century, chartouche weight wool, hand-embroidered borders in exceptional condition. Appraised value, $35,000 to $55,000. Loretta put the papers down. The number in her head, the sum of the conservative estimates, was just over $1 million. The high end of the range was closer to 1.3. She thought about the fraying lining of her coat. She thought about the savings she'd spent on gas and motels, driving back and forth to Asheville. She thought about the 16 months since her company had reorganized and cut her hours, the way she'd been doing the math every month, moving things around in her budget the way you move furniture in a small apartment, trying to make it feel like there's more space than there is. She thought about Opal, who'd known, who'd looked at Loretta, maybe 15 years ago, 20, some Sunday when they were all together, and Loretta was trying not to let anyone see she was stressed about money, and had known, and had kept these things, and trusted Bet to keep them, and trusted Bet to know when the time was right. She called Wade back. "I got the appraisal," she said. A pause. "And the items Bet left me are worth approximately $1.1 million. The low estimate." The silence on the other end of the line was a specific kind of silence, the kind that has a lot of moving parts. "That can't be right," Wade said. "I have 3 independent appraisers and documentation going back to the 1880s. Those items were part of Betty's estate. We should be discussing. They were specifically bequeathed to me in the will, Wade. Gerald Hartwell has the documents. The estate attorney I retained, whose name is not something I'm going to share with you, has reviewed everything. There's nothing to discuss." "Loretta, you called them old junk," she said, not angrily. She was surprised to find she wasn't angry. She was something else, settled maybe, or finished. "I want you to know that I heard that, and it's okay, because you were right that you didn't know what they were. But I think maybe Betta did know, and Betta gave them to me anyway. So." She let that land. "I'm going to sell the pearls," she told him, "and keep the brooch. For now. The shawl I'm going to donate to a textile collection in Asheville, in Opal's name." She paused. "I thought you should know." She ended the call before he could respond. The sale of the pearls, arranged through a major auction house in New York, took 4 months. They sold in the spring, on a Tuesday afternoon, while Loretta was at work catching up on invoices, and the auction house called her when it was done. Final price, $910,000. After fees and tax consultation, and the practical matters that attend to any significant transaction, Loretta was left with enough to pay off her apartment, put a serious amount into a fund for Kevin's daughter, keep 3 years of living expenses in savings, and still have money left over. She bought a new coat, just the one. A good one, navy wool, lined properly. She wore it to Opal's grave on the anniversary of her grandmother's death, in the Asheville cemetery where the October rain moved through the trees with the same deliberate patience it always had. She brought the brooch with her. She didn't take it out of her pocket. She just stood there with it in her hand, feeling the weight of it. And she thought about the women in her family who'd known that the most important things don't make themselves obvious. That real value doesn't need to perform. That sometimes the people who love you most leave you what you need in the only way they know how. Frederick Ansell had framed the appraisal documents for her, unbidden, as a gift. They hung in her home office next to a photograph of Opal standing in front of the magnolia tree. Every morning when Loretta sat down to work, she saw them. Some people walk past the most valuable things in their lives every day and never stop to look. Bet had stopped. Opal had stopped. And when the moment came, when the storage unit door rolled up and the smell of cedar and sachets came out to meet her, Loretta had stopped too. That is the whole of it. That is what happened. If someone in your life has ever left you something that didn't look like a gift at first, or if you've been the one carrying something heavy that nobody else seemed to value, leave a comment below. We read every single one. And if this story stayed with you, share it with someone who needs to hear it today. We'll be back with another story very soon.